This story crosses borders in a way airports never can. What you're about to hear sounds impossible. A single Filipino ticket that shattered order in New York, then triggered 10,000 foreigners to pour into Cebu in one day. It began as a tiny promotional loophole, dismissed as internet noise. It ended with sirens, closed terminals, stunned officials, and one quiet Filipino analyst whose warnings were laughed at until the numbers arrived and the world had to listen. Before this story starts, stop scrolling and breathe for 1 second. Wherever you're watching from right now, on a phone in traffic, a TV in your living room, or a laptop in a quiet room, drop your country in the comments. In 2024, Midtown Manhattan looked like it always did. Steel, glass, impatient footsteps, and the constant hum of commerce. Inside the New York Port Authority Administrative Building, Deputy Commissioner Helen Rourke stared at a wall of live transit dashboards. Helen was known for hard decisions and clean public messaging. She had managed hurricanes, labor strikes, and sudden crowd surges after championship parades. Her record was flawless. She trusted predictability, controlled announcements, and firm perimeter plans. So, when an assistant mentioned a sudden online trend called the Filipino Ticket, Helen barely glanced up. "Another viral stunt," she said, already moving to her next briefing. She didn't know the phrase was linked to aviation, hospitality, and a price anomaly that would turn crowds into currents. The Filipino Ticket wasn't a paper ticket. It was a bundled itinerary created by a Cebu-based travel cooperative called Islagate, designed to revive tourism after slow seasons. A New York startup partner helped distribute it through a travel app. One click, discounted flight segments, ferry credits, and local stays in Cebu, all tied to a cultural festival week. The price looked too good, almost unreal, because a currency conversion bug duplicated a rebate twice. Instead of correcting it quietly, influencers amplified it. "Fly to Cebu for the cost of a weekend in Queens," they said. Screenshots spread like wildfire. Within hours, group chats in Brooklyn, Moscow, Sao Paulo, and Nairobi were coordinating. A mistake became a movement, and a movement became a stampede. At JFK Airport, lines thickened first, then began to warp. People weren't just checking in. They were arriving in clusters with matching app confirmations, printed QR codes, and identical Cebu itineraries. Airline counters flagged duplicates. Security asked questions that sounded normal, but were answered with a strange unity. "We're going to Cebu today." By afternoon, confusion spilled outside the terminals. Taxi lanes clogged. Shuttle routes stalled. The app's customer support collapsed under calls. And in the middle of this, an operations alert landed on Helen Rourke's desk. Unusual outbound passenger concentration, abnormal destination clustering, rising disputes at ticketing kiosks. Helen frowned, not alarmed yet. "Patch the app. Airlines will sort it," she said. She believed systems corrected themselves. She had no idea the system was feeding itself. While New York tightened its jaw, 9,000 miles away in Cebu, data analyst Miguel Migs de la Cruz watched dashboards that most executives ignored. Migs worked at Islagate's tiny office above a bakery near Fuente Osmeña. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. He had one advantage. He understood patterns. He saw the ticket anomaly at dawn and watched the bookings spike into numbers that didn't belong to any normal curve. Then he saw something worse. Many bookings were coming from New York in concentrated bursts, like synchronized waves. Migs emailed government tourism desks, airport operations, and even a New York City contact listed on a partnership memo. His message was simple: "This will overflow terminals. Prepare for mass arrival." Replies were polite, slow, and mostly dismissive. At 0 hours, 3 minutes and 44 seconds, 0 local time, Helen's team held an internal briefing. An aviation liaison described unusual volume towards Cebu, then added, almost laughing, "Apparently, it's a Filipino festival bundle." Helen leaned back. "A festival? People will spread out," she said. A younger analyst, Jaden Park, hesitated. "Ma'am, clusters are forming. It's coordinated." Helen cut him off gently, not cruelly. "New York handles crowds. We don't panic over hashtags." She authorized a minor advisory and told airports to increase staff by a fraction. In her mind, it was enough. In Miggs's mind, it was dangerously late. He ran simulations using past crowd surges, boarding choke points, security lanes, custom staffing. His model produced a red banner, cascading failure across checkpoints within 6 hours. Miggs tried a different approach. Instead of warnings, he prepared evidence. He compiled booking maps, departure clusters, and predicted arrival windows, then sent them again, this time to a Cebu airport deputy director named Mariel Soto. Mariel was practical, trained in crisis response, but tired of false alarms. Still, the clarity of Miggs's graphs made her pause. She called him directly. "These numbers, are you sure?" Miggs didn't dramatize. "It's not a rumor, it's already sold," he said. 10,000 will land within 1 day, and most are foreigners unfamiliar with local transfers. They will clog baggage, immigration, transport." Mariel swallowed. Cebu's airport could manage peaks, but this was a tidal event. She requested a call with Islagate leadership. Miggs knew leadership would resist. He asked for 15 minutes instead. The Islagate executives were proud Cebuano entrepreneurs, cautious about public perception. They worried that admitting a bug would damage trust. When Miggs presented his forecast, one executive chuckled. 10,000? In 1 day? That's exaggeration, another said. Even if true, it's good for tourism. Miggs stayed calm. Tourism collapses when people are stranded, he replied. If arrivals bottleneck, social media will show chaos, not welcome. They waved him off, planning to quietly fix the app conversion. Miggs pressed harder, pointing to the real danger. The bug had already propagated through third-party resellers and screenshot confirmations. Even if the price corrected now, many confirmations would remain valid, and people would still show up expecting passage. A silence formed, not agreement uncertainty. He used it. "Let me coordinate mitigation. Give me authority for emergency logistics." They hesitated, then refused. The same afternoon, New York's situation shifted from inconvenient to unstable. At 0 hours, 6 minutes and 6 seconds, 0, a surge hit JFK and Newark simultaneously. Travelers argued at counters when fares changed mid-checkout. Some had bank alerts showing pending charges. Others had screenshots of the old price and insisted it was binding. Security lines thickened. Airline staff called supervisors. Supervisors called police. Helen Rourke watched the feed and felt something unusual. Not fear, but irritation. "This app is causing disorder," she said. "Cut off distribution. But apps don't have on-off switches once users mirror links across platforms." Meanwhile, journalists smelled a story. Mystery Cebu Ticket disrupts New York airports. Cameras arrived, and cameras intensify anything they capture. Helen ordered controlled messaging. Blame misinformation, promise order. Yet disorder was now the headline, and headlines invite crowds. Miggs, unable to secure authority, did what engineers do when permission fails. He built a workaround. He contacted a network of Cebu transport cooperatives, jeepney associations, bus lines, ferry operators, and volunteer groups. He explained the situation without panic, offering a plan: temporary arrival corridors, pop-up translation stations, pre-printed route cards, crowd marshals, hydration points, and a real-time SMS broadcast for distribution of passengers across hotels and ports. Some laughed at first. 10,000 foreigners? In Cebu? In one day? Miggs didn't argue. He sent screenshots of booking spikes and arrival schedules. A few leaders recognized the threat immediately. When one person believes you, a chain begins. By midnight, Miggs had a volunteer roster and a rough traffic plan, even without official endorsement. He was building scaffolding under an event that hadn't landed yet. Back in New York, Helen's staff finally pulled deeper analytics. Jaden Park returned with a detailed report. The Filipino Ticket wasn't isolated. It had branched into multiple reseller channels. Even after the app patch, confirmations were circulating. He showed Helen a chart of outbound passengers with Cebu as a final destination, concentrated within 36 hours. Helen's expression tightened. "How confident is this forecast?" she asked. Jaden replied carefully. "High. We've already seen partial waves arrive at terminals." Helen stared at the graph, then at the live feed of swelling lines. Her decades of instinct told her to wait for certainty, yet the evidence was already certainty. It just looked unfamiliar. "If this spills into the city," she murmured, "we lose control." She authorized a multi-agency response, but bureaucracy is slow and crowds are fast. The next morning, a plane from New York touched down in Cebu earlier than expected due to tailwinds. At 0 hours, 8 minutes and 28 seconds, 0 Cebu time, immigration counters were staffed for ordinary volume. Then passengers kept coming and coming. Families speaking languages the officers rarely heard. Travelers holding identical QR confirmations and asking the same question, "Where do we go now?" Baggage carousels jammed. A few passengers tried to exit through the wrong doors. Taxi queues spilled into lanes. Some locals stared, amazed. Some drivers attempted opportunistic pricing. Stress rose. Mariel Soto, the deputy director, pushed through the crowd and saw the early shape of disaster. Then she saw something else. Printed route cards in multiple languages already being handed out by volunteers in orange vests. She blinked. "Who organized this?" she demanded. A volunteer pointed toward a corner where Miggs stood, phone in hand, directing people with calm gestures. Marielle approached Miggs, suspicion and relief colliding in her face. "Did you do this?" she asked. Miggs nodded. "It's only a first layer," he said. "More flights are inbound." Marielle looked at the route cards, simple maps to bus bays, ferry terminals, and check-in points. She saw hydration stations and bilingual signs taped to pillars. She saw a small group of student volunteers translating. None of it was perfect, but it was something, and something can stop panic from becoming stampede. Marielle made a decision that surprised her own staff. She pulled her radio and said, "All units, integrate with this civilian routing plan. Whoever set it up, bring him to operations." In that moment, Miggs stopped being an ignored analyst and became a coordinator in the center of the storm. As flights stacked through the day, Cebu's airport became a living test. 10,000 arrivals weren't a single wave, they were layered swells. Each hour, new groups entered the same bottlenecks: immigration, baggage, exits, transport. Miggs adjusted the plan in real time, using basic principles: distribute flow, reduce friction, communicate simply. When one taxi lane jammed, he diverted passengers to buses with fixed pricing. When translation shortages appeared, he recruited call center workers remotely through messaging apps. When confusion spread about ferry schedules, he established a single bulletin board, updated every 20 minutes. Meanwhile, social media live streams showed a surprising narrative. Not chaos, but organized welcome. The difference wasn't luck. It was preparation built from data that authorities had initially laughed at. New York wasn't as fortunate. Helen Rourke faced press questions about why airports had been caught off guard. She avoided blaming anyone directly. "We are responding to an unforeseen surge," she said, but reporters read unprepared. Videos of long lines, missed flights, and ticket disputes flooded timelines. City officials demanded accountability. Helen felt the pressure sharpen into something personal. Her reputation, once unshakable, now felt fragile. She requested a direct call with Cebu Airport leadership, expecting frustration. Instead, Mariel Soto reported something that sounded impossible. "We're holding," Mariel said. "We're stretched but stabilized. There's a civilian analyst coordinating flow with our teams." Helen paused. "Civilian?" Mariel replied. "Yes, he predicted this. He built an emergency routing plan before we were fully activated." Helen's mind snapped toward a new question. Who warned us first? Helen traced emails and found Miggs's earlier message buried under routine correspondence. She opened it and felt heat climb her neck. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was structured, polite, and specific. Exact arrival windows, predicted bottlenecks, suggested mitigations. She had dismissed it because of its origin, a small cooperative in Cebu, a Filipino analyst without a title she recognized. That realization hit harder than the headlines. Her identity was built on competence. Yet competence requires listening, not just deciding. Helen requested a video conference with Miggs directly. When his face appeared on screen, tired, focused, surrounded by airport noise, Helen cleared her throat. "Mr. de la Cruz," she began, "I received your warning." Too late. Miggs didn't scold. "The event is still moving," he said. "We can still reduce harm. Tell me your current choke points." What followed was not an argument. It was engineered to operate a collaboration across continents. Miggs asked for specifics, line lengths, staffing ratios, peak departure windows. Helen's team provided numbers. Miggs sketched a triage approach, separate travelers with confirmed boarding from those stuck in pricing disputes, create a dedicated verification desk with trained staff, funnel communication into one official channel so rumors wouldn't multiply, use timed entry blocks instead of open-ended queuing, coordinate with airlines to stagger boarding calls. Helen listened, surprised by how practical it sounded. None of it required miracle resources, just clarity and flow control. "Why does this work in Cebu?" Helen asked quietly. Miggs answered without ego. "Because people panic when they don't know what's happening. Give them a path and a timeline, and they cooperate." Helen stared at her chaotic dashboards and realized her response had been rooted in authority, not guidance. In Cebu, the 10th hour of arrivals threatened to overwhelm everyone. Tempers flared. A few tourists shouted about refunds. Some locals complained about traffic. Heat and fatigue pressed against patience. Miggs anticipated the breaking point and introduced a small but powerful change: visible reassurance. He positioned volunteers at every junction to greet arrivals, repeat directions, and offer water without debate. He also requested local radio stations to broadcast simple updates in English and Cebuano: where to go, what to expect, what not to believe online. The atmosphere shifted. Confusion narrowed. When people feel seen, they calm down. By late evening, the flow stabilized enough for airport staff to breathe. Mariel Soto watched the crowd thinning and shook her head in disbelief. "We should have listened earlier," she admitted. Her officers nodded, exhausted but relieved. New York implemented Miggs's suggestions in phases. Helen established a unified Cebu ticket response desk at both major airports, staffed by airline reps and city mediators. She authorized signage that used plain language instead of legal jargon. She coordinated with transit agencies to reroute passenger flow away from clogged entry points. Within hours, pressure eased. Not solved, eased. And in crisis management, easing is survival. Helen faced cameras again with a different posture. "We are applying updated crowd management protocols," she said. based on real-time data and international coordination. She didn't mention MiGs yet. She wasn't ready to credit an outsider publicly. But inside, she knew something uncomfortable. The person who understood the problem best had been the one she dismissed. That fact sat heavy. The next day, the scale of the story reached global outlets. 10,000 arrivals flood Cebu, but airport holds. Analysts debated how a small island hub avoided collapse while New York struggled. Commentators pointed to community cooperation. Others highlighted improvisation. Few understood the underlying truth. Someone had modeled the surge early and designed friction-reducing pathways. Marielle insisted MiGs join an official debrief. When he walked into the operations room, executives who had laughed days earlier looked away. MiGs didn't seek revenge. He presented data, showing what worked and what nearly failed. He recommended long-term fixes, automated anomaly detection, cross-agency alert thresholds, pre-approved emergency logistics partnerships. One executive finally spoke, voice low. "We underestimated you." MiGs replied simply, "You underestimated the math. I just listened to it." Silence followed, different from before. This silence carried respect. Helen Rourke, still facing political scrutiny, made a choice that risked pride. She called a press briefing and acknowledged coordination with Cebu's incident team. Then she named MiGs de la Cruz publicly. "We received critical forecasting and mitigation guidance from an analyst in Cebu who identified patterns early," she said. Reporters leaned forward. Helen continued, carefully. "I initially dismissed the warning. That was a mistake. In complex systems, the best signal doesn't always come from the highest rank. It was rare to hear a public official admit error without deflection. Some critics still attacked her. Yet her confession shifted the narrative from incompetence to learning." Helen later sent a private email to MiGs. "Thank you for staying professional when I did not." MiGs responded with one sentence. "In crises, we save people first, then repair pride." The Filipino Ticket bug was patched, refunds were negotiated, and the promotional bundle was rebuilt with safeguards. But the cultural consequence in Cebu lasted longer than the glitch. Visitors who arrived expecting chaos instead encountered organized hospitality, volunteers guiding them, and local systems adapting quickly. Many foreigners extended stays, spending money in small businesses rather than only resorts. Journalists interviewed jeepney drivers who described coordinating routes via group chats. Tourists posted videos praising the kindness and clarity of instructions. Cebu's local government, recognizing the global attention, launched a formal, rapid welcome protocol based largely on MiGs's framework. He was asked to lead the technical side, though he still wore the same plain shirt and carried the same worn laptop. His power was never performance, it was precision. Weeks later, an international aviation conference invited speakers to discuss the incident. Helen attended reluctantly, knowing critics would be present. Marielle attended proudly, knowing her team had survived. MiGs attended reluctantly again, uncomfortable with stages. On the panel, Helen described New York's failure points with honest detail: fragmented communication, delayed escalation, overconfidence in routine. Marielle described Cebu's near collapse and the improvisations that prevented it. Then MiGs spoke softly, without theatrics. He explained crowd dynamics like water. Pressure builds at constrictions. Relief comes from distributed channels. Panic spikes when information is inconsistent. He showed simple graphs, not flashy slides. The room went quiet not because of dramatic storytelling, but because the logic was undeniable. Afterward, a senior official from a major airport authority approached him and said, "We need this model." MiGs nodded. "Then build listening into the system," he replied, "not just alarms." The final twist of the story came months later, when Islagate received a legal notice from a reseller claiming damages. The executives panicked, fearing financial ruin. They asked Miggs for a defense strategy. He didn't shout, "I told you so." He requested logs, timelines, and contractual flow. He built a transparent incident report that showed when the anomaly originated, how quickly they attempted to patch it, and how they coordinated safety mitigation to reduce harm. That report became their shield. In settlement talks, the reseller's lawyers expected denial and excuses. Instead, they faced a calm document filled with evidence and responsibility. The outcome wasn't perfect, but it was survivable. After the agreement, the executives gathered privately and offered Miggs a promotion, a public title, and a bonus. Miggs accepted the resources but asked for one condition: create a protocol where warnings can't be laughed away. Helen Rourke returned to New York with a quieter leadership style. She established a signal review team, specifically tasked with evaluating unconventional warnings. She changed policy so external analysts could submit structured risk alerts through a verified channel. She trained staff to treat unknown sources as potentially valuable rather than automatically irrelevant. People around her noticed the shift. Some called it humility, others called it political caution. Helen didn't argue. She knew what drove it, a lesson learned the hard way. Systems fail when leaders treat reputation like armor instead of a responsibility. The Filipino Ticket incident became a case study in city management schools, not because of the glitch itself, but because it revealed how quickly pride can become a bottleneck. Helen wrote one line in her personal notebook after the final report: "Authority must stay flexible, or it breaks." In Cebu, Miggs never became a celebrity in the way the internet wanted. He avoided dramatic interviews. He preferred quiet rooms and clear data. Yet his work rippled outward. Universities invited him to teach forecasting workshops. Local officials asked him to design surge plans for festivals, storms, and port delays. He insisted on community involvement because he knew spreadsheets alone don't move crowds, people do. He trained volunteer leaders to use simple checklists, radio protocols, and multilingual signage templates. He created a phone-based dashboard that updated transport availability in real time, accessible even on low bandwidth. The result wasn't glamour, it was readiness. In the next major festival, visitor numbers rose sharply again, but the airport held without panic. That was the victory Miggs cared about. Normalcy preserved during abnormal moments. When the two sides finally met in person, Helen visiting Cebu for a follow-up summit, the moment was unexpectedly human. Helen arrived with a small team, expecting formal greetings. Instead, she was met by volunteers who remembered the incident and thanked her for admitting fault publicly. Helen looked unsettled, then smiled. She found Miggs near a bulletin board, adjusting a schedule chart with a marker. "You made me look unprepared," she said, half joking, half truth. Miggs replied gently, "No." The situation revealed what was already missing. Helen nodded, absorbing it. "I owe you an apology," she said, quietly. "I judged your warning by its source, not its content." Miggs didn't demand more. "You changed the system after," he answered. "That's rarer than an apology." For the first time, Helen felt lighter. The world loves a simple story. Glitch causes chaos. Hero saves day. But the real lesson was more uncomfortable. The Filipino Ticket didn't break New York because New York lacked intelligence. It strained New York because complex systems punish arrogance, especially when leaders assume routine equals control. Cebu didn't succeed because it had infinite resources. It held because it listened quickly, distributed flow, and used community as infrastructure. Miggs was not magical. He was methodical. He didn't win through status. He won through evidence. And Helen's redemption didn't come from a perfect fix. It came from acknowledging failure publicly and adapting policy afterward. That is what real professionalism looks like. Not never being wrong, but updating fast when you are. If you strip away airports and headlines, this story becomes a mirror. People often reject ideas that arrive from unexpected places. They laugh first, then scramble when reality arrives. The most dangerous phrase in any organization isn't "we don't know," it's "we already know." The Filipino Ticket incident forced powerful systems to confront that truth. A quiet analyst from Cebu was ignored until his predictions became visible. A confident official in New York had to learn that competence includes listening downward and outward, and thousands of travelers, strangers to one another, proved that crowds can behave responsibly when given clear paths. Evidence doesn't care about prestige, patterns don't respect titles. Reality always collects its debt. On the final day of the summit, Helen stood on a balcony overlooking Cebu's runway, watching planes line up against a soft, humid sky. She turned to Miggs and said, "I thought strength meant certainty." Miggs replied, "Strength is adjusting without shame." Below them, ground crews moved with practiced rhythm, guided by protocols born from a crisis that could have turned ugly. The city had absorbed the shock and evolved. New York had absorbed the embarrassment and improved. And a single pricing anomaly had revealed a universal lesson. The strongest systems are built on humility, not ego. So if there's one takeaway to carry with you, it's this: innovation often arrives from the place you least expect, and wisdom is simply the courage to listen before the sirens start.